Hello, welcome. Today I would like to share with you a tutorial showing how to read the information about user logon ID and make it visible on your search results and export data in TLIF on cloud. If you have a new TLIF installation, you will probably quickly notice that in the session search area, when you are displaying information about your sessions, there is a view about the customer, and in this view there is a user login ID column which is empty. So in this tutorial I would like to show you how you can instruct TLIF how to fill in data into this column. The first step in the process will be to find a session where user did provide the login ID, so we will be able to capture this information. You can see that in this session we see that on the third step customer actually entered the login ID and this was captured by TLIF. So in that particular case we will be capturing the user input made on the login page. Of course, the user ID or logon ID can exist in multiple places across the website. So effectively in the end we will be reviewing all those places and feeding the data to our column in TLIF from different sources. But the first source is the login page, where we want to intercept the value entered into the field WC account display form input logon ID in logon_1. Before starting any work or defining any events, I will first save this session to the event tester. So once the event is created, it will be easy to validate if this is working and scraping the right information from the session. Probably the easiest way to do this is to go to the raw data of the page of the information captured by TLIF and find the element which we are now evaluating. So we see the load, click and value change, which is the one which is interesting for us. When you open the JSON part of the message, you will be able to find out the ID of the element which we want to capture. Now when you right click on that, you can create an event which will be looking for all of the steps relating to this particular element. You can see that this event is already preset for us to look for steps. It will be evaluating every step, meaning that we never know which particular step in the captured data flow will be related to this specific element. And it already have the target ID of the element which we are looking for filled in. However, at this moment the event will be fired every time there will be any kind of interaction with this element. So click, change, focus in, focus out, and so on. So we need to add another condition which will tell TLIF that we are only looking for change events. For that we will use the event type step attribute, which is an out-of-the-box attribute for every TLIF installation. You might see that it is looking for event type part of the JSON message, and in our case this will be a change. So in this moment, the event which we are creating will be fired every time TLIF will register a change in this particular field. To make sure that it's only a change which is entering the data and not, for example, customer deleting the information, we can add another condition which will look for the current value and make sure that it's not empty. So in that case, we are only looking for changes where customer was entering the data and not deleting this. We want to now store the value which we see in this particular step. So we will use the same step attribute, target current value, to read and store the information. Now we have an event which is looking through every step captured by TLIF. So step is the user interaction registered by the UI Capture SDK. And if this particular interaction was a change event on the Logon form user ID field and the value is not empty, we will store the value in the event. Having this done, we can go back to Event Manager and now look for our session attribute, which should be holding the user Logon ID. You can see this is an out-of-the-box session attribute, which is disabled by default. So it requires to be configured and enabled. When I click on Edit, I will need to add an event or list of events which are reading the Logon ID from the session data and which will be source of the data for the session attribute. So here I will use the event which was just created. And of course, I need to activate the session attribute. Having this done, we can open the event tester, where we will be able to verify if the event is working and if this is providing the data to the session attribute. So I will select the session attribute and the event which was just created. I will use the session which we saved to the event tester as the one having the person logging into the system. And then we can validate the results. You can see that both of those elements were actually successfully evaluated. So we have the value captured by the event, and it is updating the value of the session attribute on the 7th captured interaction. Then across all of the rest of the session, the value of the session attribute is already set as a purchaser. If this is done, now for any new sessions arriving to your system, you will start to see that the user Logon ID of users who logged in into the system will be filled in with the data. Now when you return to the system after some time and you will again make a search for sessions, you should be able to see that for some of them TLIF is now able to capture the user login IDs. Of course, not for everyone. It might be that not every user was logging into the system, or it might be that they were using different form fields or different forms, different places in the process to provide the login information. As the next step, we can now evaluate other elements of the process where customers might be entering the logon ID. Let's look on those sessions where customers are visiting the registration form. If we take this kind of a session, we can see in the session timeline that people are going to the logon form, clicking on the register link, and then in the registration form they are filling in the data. Here the logon ID is in another field, another name. It's WC user registration add form input logon ID in register 11. So we would need to create another event which would be reading the logon ID from this user interaction. Again, before we go to creating this, we save the event to the event tester. And now we can open the event manager to create an event which will be reading this data. This will be evaluating all steps, and we will be looking for conditions. We will be using step attributes. So event type, this exactly in the previous example will be changed. Target ID of the element. This is the value which we found out in our session data. Again, we might want to create another condition which will be making sure that the value is not empty. And if all of them are met, we will be storing the value entered by the user. Now we can save this event. And again, we can go to our session attribute to update it to be populated by another event. So we click on Add Event and we select our newly created event, which will be now also populating the information in the session attribute. Going forward, you continue in the same way, identifying all other places where customers might be entering the logon ID, or maybe you want to use something else like an email address, phone number, whatever information you find suitable. We'll go to event tester to validate that the session attribute and event are working. Now we see that event was fired on the third hit, on the fourth step, and since the third hit, the session attribute is set to the specific value. So now again going to the session search, we will now see that also those people who went through the registration process but did not log in the same session, we will capture their user login IDs. Going forward, you will of course be continuing this analysis, going through all of the forms and processes on the site to make sure that TLIF will be reading the logon ID data from each and every place where it might appear in the session, either entered by the user or presented by the application.